Sometimes in life, like, you actually have to slow down in order to speed up. And in order to improve the recovery process, like, you have to take time for yourself. And you never know what you might discover in this time of this, like, quieter period.
Welcome to How to Fail, the podcast that believes that most failures can teach us something meaningful. Until 2021, Louise Thompson was known as the former Made in Chelsea castmate turned fitness influencer who twice appeared on the cover of Women's Health. But when she gave birth to her son Leo, all that changed. She experienced a series of life-threatening hemorrhages before ending up in intensive care, absolutely convinced she was going to die. And yet, Thompson has managed to alchemise her pain into something deeply inspiring for her 1.4 million followers on Instagram. Inspiring, yes, but also searingly honest. I've never encountered anyone so willing to bare their soul and share what they're going through as they're going through it. The highs, the lows, and the inevitable pitfalls. Her newly released memoir, Lucky, is testament to the importance of her voice in the physical and mental health space. It is an extraordinary read, sometimes harrowing, sometimes uplifting, but always unfailingly honest. I'm so honoured that she's on the podcast today. What she went through almost killed her, but as Thompson writes in her memoir, surviving it has given me an awakening. Louise Thompson, welcome to How to Fail.
Thank you so much for having me. And I love your intros.
Oh.
And I honestly was thinking this morning, if I can get through the intro without crying, that'll be a really good start.
How are we doing so far?
I feel really good. This is such a big moment for me because I've admired this podcast for such a long time, and being able to come on this platform to speak about my journey, my story, and hopefully provide, hope to other people that are going through a rough time is kind of actually one of the main reasons that I'm here.
That's so meaningful to me, and thank you so, so much. I have been such an admirer of yours for a long time, as you probably know, because of my slightly creepy tendency to leave comments on your Instagram, to creep into your DMs, to be like, Louise, I'd love to meet you one day. And now we're here.
We are.
It's all led us to this point. And your book is an extraordinary read. You should be so proud of it. It really did leave a lasting impact on me. Describe a little about how that awakening feels today.
Thank you for reading it. And it's a really big moment for me. And, releasing actually the kind of depths of what's happened to me in the memoir. I haven't really felt comfortable enough to go into all of the details of things for 2 years because it's taken me so long to kind of really come to terms with it. And there are still things that I have, like, still questions unanswered. It's kind of an evolving process, isn't it? Like seeing what, that next chapter brings out in terms of like being able to help people and responding to the feedback and opening up more of the conversations out there around birth trauma and PTSD and the other like mental health conditions I've struggled with.
There is a purity and a courage to your honesty. Is that something that happened as a consequence of everything that you went through? Or have you always been like that, a truth teller?
I can't lie. Like, I have something in me. And that's why I should never have been on a reality show. I actually can't lie and I can't act. I only know how to be honest in myself. And that's really hard because sometimes I don't want to have to show so much, and I'm an incredibly emotional person too. And sometimes I don't always want to have to be that vulnerable and that emotional. So it's always served me really well to be particularly honest.
I feel that it's something you possibly share with your brother, Sam Thompson, also was on Made in Chelsea and then went on to win I'm a Celebrity. You're very close, aren't you?
We are really close. We live next door to each other. And we actually did renovations at the same time. We've now built a massive barricade between our houses, but he still manages to peek through the tiny slats in the trellis between the garden walls. We're very close. We're quite close in age, 2.5 years apart. We've had moments throughout our lives where we haven't been that close. I really didn't want him to join the TV show. I didn't think it would be good for him. I didn't think he had the stones for it. He's now way more confident than I am. He's so confident, and I'm still working on it. His career is completely skyrocketed, and it's been hard over the last couple of years because our worlds have gone in completely different directions. You know, he has really grown, and my entire career basically crumbled, and my entire life crumbled. You know, and weirdly, actually, on the note of my brother, and I don't know why this is popping into my head, when I really nearly died and spent a month in hospital, when I came out, I felt like I had a different personality. Like I literally felt as though I was a completely different person. I couldn't remember anything about my old self. And I hated a lot of what I stood for before. And I remember having a conversation with my mum when she came to, you know, we were sat outside the pharmacy, like waiting to collect my medication before being discharged. And I said to her, like really seriously, I was like, Sam needs to stop everything he's doing. He needs to stop working. This is all terrible. Like he's going to end up where I've ended up. You know, we need to slow down and we need to stop all of the social media stuff. Like it's not good. It's all really, I don't know, like performative. And anyway, now as I've kind of continue to get better, I've realized that like I, you know, just shouldn't take anything in life quite that seriously to care so much about that.
I can totally understand it, because there you are, you've almost died, and you thought with absolute certainty that you were going to die.
Yeah.
And then to come out into this world that values superficial things must seem so disjointed. You are my favourite kind of guest in that you not only provided me with 3 failures, you provided me with 6, and each one was a banger. So I've chosen 3 from the 6, but I hope to weave in the other 3 along the way. And so thank you so much for that and for committing yourself so seriously to the task in hand. Your first failure, as you describe it, is your failure to have a proper job.
It's so embarrassing.
Well, tell us about that, because you relate it to your Made in Chelsea years. So how did you end up on that show? Because there you were, you were a geography student at the University of Edinburgh, really talented student, had gone to a great school, and then suddenly you're on Made in Chelsea. How did that happen?
Well, it's a good question. And first of all, I just want to say thank you for acknowledging the failures, because I have loads of them. But also a lot of people's failures stem from childhood and failing at school. I was the total opposite. So I was a complete nerd and a do-gooder and really a straight A student and always did really, really well. And that followed me through like into university. And I guess it all fell apart really when I started drinking and hanging out with boys, and they became a priority. And also then when I was asked to be on Made in Chelsea. So when I was at uni, I guess I was probably on course to get a serious job when I left university, because I would have got a good degree and maybe ended up with a completely different career. But I think I was in my 3rd year, and the show had just started. So I did 4 years at Edinburgh. I might have been in my 2nd year, sort of halfway through. Made in Chelsea had started, and I kind of had known a lot about it because my good friend Rosie, who I was at school with, ended up being on it. And I dated Spencer, and I was going out a lot with Hugo, Millie, and all of the kind of main cast. I was going to say the A team. So the show was split into
Really?
People used to call that. Like, I didn't say. This was not
Who's
my
on the
doing.
B team? Francis Boole.
I loved Francis. The B team is now one of my best friends, Binky, so I shouldn't even say that. But it was Jessica, Binky, and Ollie. And so we were just split into 2. They obviously weren't the B team. They probably got more airtime. But yeah, no, I was friends with one of the friendship groups. And then the producers really wanted me to join. And I kept saying no, because it was just not what I'd ever wanted to do. Like, I've never wanted to be famous. I've never wanted to be on TV. It was actually just me and Rosie were the 2 girls who didn't do drama out of our friendship group. Because we couldn't get on stage, and it just wasn't for us. So it was really weird that we ended up on the show. And yeah, I said no. And I'd even been quite rude about the show because I thought it was a waste of an education. Reality TV was such a new concept. I didn't really know anything about it. And in the end, I think I'd gone through quite a rough breakup up in Edinburgh, and I was slightly ready to try something new. And I just couldn't keep saying no. And they just kept framing it slightly differently. So they obviously managed to twist my arm somehow. And they said, oh, well, just do it for one scene, like one episode, and then you never have to do it again, which would have been way worse, like as if that was a good selling point. And then I've associated myself with the show. And if I left after one episode, then that would just be terrible because I wouldn't have reaped any of the benefits. But I did end up doing it, and I came to London, and it was a weird, funny old time for me because I was trying to be a serious student up in Edinburgh and had like cool friends up there that were all a bit more academics and studious and into different things. And then I was going to film on Made in Chelsea, where we were just, we were filming in nightclubs and driving fast cars and that kind of thing.
For £25 a day, I was shocked to discover in your book. That was how much you were paid.
Yeah, at the beginning it was £25 a day. Then it went up to 50 after one series. And then after a while I was paid £200 a day, and that was capped at that. So that was the absolute max. And which is just obviously, not a lot than when you're expected to be driving a Ferrari.
Yes.
And I would then spend all of my all of my money on clothes just to wear to look semi-decent on the show.
There's an amazing line in your book that I'm trying to find, and it was about the fact that on Made in Chelsea, it was always the men who won.
Yeah, I did feel like the men always came out on top, which is ridiculous because most of the people working on the show were female. They were celebrated for being naughty and for being mean and for playing us around. And I should be more specific because it was a personal thing. I always felt as though I was fairly nice and treated people with respect, and yet I would end up looking really weak and like a doormat. And it's really odd that the nation seemed to always be backing someone that was horrible.
Yes.
And and it was tough. Everything was really real, and I was in some serious relationships on the show, and I would then end up going through a breakup, which is hard enough at the best of times. And I've never been good at breakups, by the way. I've always really struggled with change and kind of falling out of love with people, and go through all of that is really tricky anyway. And especially when you're in your late teens, early 20s, and then for that to be shown to the world is for people to have an opinion about is extra tough. So I would go through these breakups. I'd be genuinely really upset. People would watch it and think that I was weak for crying, which just doesn't make any sense to me. And then, you'd be like pitted against one of the other girls because your ex was then dating someone else, and they might have been slimmer or taller or prettier or had a punchier catch line. They'd say they'd say something that was cool, and I don't know. It was really tough.
I'm so sorry. You don't think it's terrible, really, the amount that reality TV is consumed as entertainment without value being ascribed to someone's lived experience that you are sharing on screen. And I wonder, you describe yourself as the ultimate people pleaser in your book. And that fear of rejection and wanting people to approve of you is all wrapped up in that. And that must have been a very uncomfortable space to inhabit. You must have really questioned your identity.
I did. And I really struggled to grow up like a normal person would, because I was then basing my decisions on what other people would want from me, and whether that was the producers, giving them what they wanted, kind of being a bit of a nodding dog and just agreeing to say whatever they wanted, or trying to second guess what the public would want from me. And I couldn't be myself.
Have you ever watched any of it back?
So we were forced to be careful with my words. When I was quite lucky, so that was one of the advantages of being at university really far away, is that I wouldn't have to watch I wouldn't have to go to the screenings. So typically there would be a screening every Monday where all of the cast would have to watch the episode together. Yeah, in the same room.
Sorry.
And
Because often I'm imagining that's the first time that people have seen other people on the cast talking about them in a certain way behind their back, but it's on screen.
Yeah, and you have no idea sometimes that someone's backstabbed you and said something awful about you, and then you're confronted with them right in front of you. And there are things that are better left unsaid and unknown. And that was the weird thing about reality TV, is you always know, like, especially for new people. I remember them coming in, they'd shoot their scenes, and then we would watch it back, and often people would run out crying.
Wow.
But I didn't really watch it, and I wouldn't always have to go to those because I did have lectures on that day. But then the people that I shared a flat with in Edinburgh enjoyed watching it. So we would joke about it. Like, it's not all doom and gloom.
And I thought you met your fiancé, Ryan, on the show, but you didn't. You brought him on. Is that right?
Yeah. No, he never would have ended up on the show if it wasn't for me. He's really not that sort of person. I met Ryan when I was supposed to be running part of taking part in a Virgin triathlon, and I didn't end up doing it in the end because I hate running. It gives me so much anxiety. And I was going to be paid to do it, and I had to pull out a few days before, and I'd done all these interviews with running magazines, the full shebang.
For the people pleaser. That was terrible.
Because I couldn't say no as well. I should have just said, running's not my bag. That's a no job for me. This is something I've learned more recently. But and Ryan was tied up in that. So his sister-in-law was doing all of the PR for that. So we actually met through that. And I was in a relationship with someone else at the time. So nothing came from it. But then we did, weirdly, this is quite strange, actually. So the day that me and Alec broke up.
Oh my gosh, Alec. Sorry.
Alec, I know. I
totally forgot about Alec. I'm sorry. I've literally watched every single episode of Made in Chelsea.
You're a big
Chelsea
fan, aren't you? Which I love. Yeah, when Alec and I broke up, weird. I woke up one morning and I knew something weird had happened between Alec and I. I'd had this kind of premonition dream that he cheated on me, and I couldn't get hold of him for 2 weeks. And that was very odd because I was supposed to move there. And he'd always been, the relationship was balanced. I'm not going to say that he was more into me than I was him, but he was very keen for us to have a future together. And overnight, that just completely changed. So I sort of woke up one day and was like, it's done. Like, this doesn't feel right. I had a bit of a gut instinct. And I was then going out and telling everybody that we'd broken up without even really having the conversation with Alec himself. Uber drivers, I was like, this is done. I've gone through a breakup. And Ryan messaged me that day, and I'd never heard from him. I didn't even know he had my number because we'd met once. He'd trained me for the running job, and he said, "Do you want to work out together?" And I thought, yeah, because I'm now single, so I'd like to feel good.
Yes, this connection.
Yeah,
was clearly something that was in the ether. So, before we get onto your second failure, reflecting on the Made in Chelsea years, do you regret doing them? No,
because if I hadn't, I have no idea where I would be if it wasn't for Made in Chelsea. I can't really visualize it. And it wouldn't necessarily be a better place. I'm really grateful for a lot of the things that it's offered me. An amazing platform, amazing career opportunities, an amazing experience, and stories, really. It would be easier to do it now, knowing what I know and just being much stronger.
Final question on this. Will you allow Leo, your son, to watch Made in Chelsea when he's old enough?
Yes, as a lesson on how not to live his life.
I love that. Talking of Leo brings us on to your second failure, which, as you put it, is your failure to advocate for yourself during his birth. So explain to us what happened. You found out you were pregnant, and your pregnancy wasn't easy in the sense that you had had a miscarriage before. I'm so sorry. And therefore, as is often the case, your pregnancy comes riven with anxiety because you're constantly worried that your baby won't make it. And you have this gut instinct that you needed a C-section. Take us from that moment.
Yeah, it's really actually quite strange because I, looking back more recently, actually wrote myself a message on a WhatsApp group I have with myself, which was actually created to kind of track how I was feeling throughout the pregnancy. So symptoms, kicks, that sort of thing. Not necessarily that healthy, but I was, it wasn't obsessive, but I was tracking a lot because of the anxiety following the miscarriage. And I'd written myself a note saying, I need to have a C-section or I'm really worried that I'm going to die. And I just can't believe that I wrote that. I'd always wanted a C-section. I wasn't somebody that ever felt particularly womanly. I've got the body of a 14-year-old boy and I don't feel bad about saying that. It's just the way that I am. I'm quite narrow. I'm very small. I didn't love the idea of giving birth naturally. I know people that love it. I know people that have home births, that some people pop them out like Smarties. I knew that it wasn't going to be right for me. I know my body, and I really did struggle towards the end of the pregnancy. I felt incredibly heavy. I put on an awful lot of weight. The bump was enormous. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't sleep. I was in a lot of pain, and I was having some fainting episodes. And I wish that I'd advocated for myself better. So you do have various appointments throughout the pregnancy at different milestones. And I'd said to a number of midwives, it was really tricky because I was speaking to a lot of different faces. There didn't feel like there was an awful lot of consistency throughout the pregnancy. But I'd mentioned it to a lot of different people. I'd really like to have a C-section. I think that this is the best option for me. I really don't feel good about having a natural birth. And then even to the point where I started looking for problems and I thought, but I've got my inflammatory bowel disease. But I kept getting met with so much resistance. And then I started to feel like I was looked at with judgmental eyes that was sort of suggesting you're too posh to push and that this is a luxury. And the reality is it's not. It's actually a human right to choose the birth that you want, whether that's a home birth, a birth centre birth, like a consultant-led birth, or a C-section. And I didn't know any of this. And actually, if anyone out there is listening, there is an amazing website called Birthrights UK. And they break it down for you on there. Things like you can choose your birthing partner. You can even choose the hospital. You can, if you're not happy with a consultant, you can go to your GP and request for someone else. It's such a sensitive and vulnerable time in a woman's life, especially that first birth when you have nothing to base this experience off. It's a really sad, sad story because the outcome could have been so different. And I sit here today and I'm doing really quite well. I'm 95% really back to me and happy. But that doesn't make up for the moments actually that I've lost and that I will never get back. And it doesn't make up for the fact that I won't have any more children naturally. And yeah, I guess from the kind of the refusal with the C-section, I wrote emails that weren't responded to. I then was texting. I was involved in a house fire only a month before giving birth, which should be reason enough in itself because we didn't really have anywhere as a base. Like I just wanted to have control over some element of the childbirth and knowing where we were going to be and maybe what day it was going to be. It kind of all fell on deaf ears and it was a game of pass the parcel. And in the end, I did speak to somebody on the phone and they were asking me the reasons for the anxiety. And she said, maybe you're not sleeping, and tried to prescribe me some promethazine. And that wasn't the point. Like it wasn't that I wasn't, of course no one sleeps towards the end of the pregnancy or, it's not, you just don't feel great. It's a lot to go through. And I was actually offered a C-section at a different hospital after my due date. And I went into labour on my due date, which is funny, but I knew that I was going to. And me and my brother were both born on our due dates.
Before we get on to what happened during the birth, do you mind talking about it?
No, I really don't.
Okay.
Thank you for being so considerate, though.
I can't even imagine what it is like to relive when you retell the story. Before we get onto that, how much do you think the medical establishment doesn't listen to women? And is that to do with an intimidation that some of us might feel that doctors must know best?
I mean, there's definitely an element of like white coat syndrome. It's whenever you're faced with a medical professional, you often people become intimidated and kind of revert back to being a child again. I had, I would go into some of these appointments so kind of geared up with what I knew I wanted to say. And then the moment I would sit in that chair, I would just end up agreeing with everything that they had to say, and assuming that they did know best. And I really struggled to speak up for myself, to the point where I even then brought Ryan into an appointment. And still, like, we couldn't get kind of the answer that we wanted.
I've done that repeatedly, by the way, from a different angle through fertility procedures. And whenever I tried to advocate for myself, I would always undermine myself and, imagine that they knew best. But then instead of feeling assertive, I felt really emotional and started crying. And then that would always undermine it further in the eyes of it was mostly men that I was dealing with in positions of power. And I think that it is a hugely potent thing in this space. And I'm so glad that you are talking about it. I know so many people will relate.
It's funny what you say there. It was not funny at all, but I'm so sorry about everything. Obviously, you've been through an absolutely horrendous time too. And I try to be sensitive when even talking about my childbirth experience, because, I am very lucky and very grateful that I have a beautiful son. But when I speak to the professionals in a similar way, I now feel like I have to, and it's something because I've spent so much time now in that environment, having had no experience before, never even stepped foot in a hospital before.
You'd only taken paracetamol once, you said, for period pains.
Yes. And now I'm really experienced, and I'm in and out. I've been in and out of the hospital every week practically for the last couple of years. But I now I almost like reframe it. I've become much better at advocating for myself. So now I really do know what my rights are, and I know that I can question things, refuse things, ask for IV paracetamol versus the tablet form, because it's more effective for me. It's a very unique and personal experience, but also it's a bit more expensive, so the NHS don't necessarily want to give it to you. But when I speak to doctors, I'll often like preface it with, I know that I know very little and that you know everything. And I feel like I'm always having to kind of like justify my questions almost.
Yes.
And having to put myself down, even though I am pretty well researched now, especially in some of the stuff that I deal with. And that's not great. There's so much really to talk about in terms of what needs to change.
Let's talk about the birth, which is one of the most visceral passages in your book. And I was very grateful for it, because I've never read anything like that before. And I think it's so important to share the stories of births that are deeply traumatic, to mitigate this kind of fairy tale idea of what it is to have a child. Louise, would you mind telling us what happened to you?
So I went into labour on my due date, and we went into the hospital, and I think this is quite common, is that people get sent home if they're not dilated enough. I think that they only have a capacity for a certain number of women. So that was challenging in itself, and I was in an immense amount of pain actually from the get-go, because Leo was back to back, so his spine was kind of grinding against mine. And it was agony. And I went, and nothing really could have prepared me for that level of pain. And I thought that I was quite a tough cookie. I'm someone that at school would be like, yeah, give me a Chinese burn. And I just wasn't anticipating it at all. And I'd written out my birth plan, and I knew what I was okay with and what I wasn't. But at the back of my head, obviously, I really wanted a C-section. So I still was gunning for that. Then when we did go back to the hospital, I was dilated enough to stay there. And unfortunately, it was an evening and it wasn't a weekend. And the hospital felt really dead. I hate to use that word when talking about a hospital. And I moved into a side room on the labour ward, and I just felt really, really unsupported. And because it was my first birth, and the only, I'd done kind of a hypnobirthing course quite last minute when I realised that I had resigned my fate and I wasn't going to have the C-section. I thought, okay, well, I've just got to, teach myself everything there is to know about a natural birth. And I'd done the NHS NCT course, which was all online over Zoom, and it was still slightly COVID-y rules, so everything was being done online. But I didn't know, to shout out and say, oh, please, can I have the gas and air that's in that corner of the room? I didn't know what was in the room that was an offer to me. I was already in so much pain. And I did see a bouncy ball. I was sort of bouncing on the ball, and someone came in, the lady actually who had checked me in a different department. And she came in after an hour or so and said, why is no one telling you what to do? And then even she was helping around saying, get some water on this towel, put it on the back of her neck. Here are some options. Okay, here's the gas and air. She might need that. Do you need an epidural? And she really cared. And that was the difference, was that I hate to say this, but it shouldn't be luck of the draw as to who you get and as to whether they care or not. I stayed in contact with her for a while afterwards, even recovering. She would come to my house. That's how much she cared. She was a beautiful, beautiful soul, this Spanish lady called Suzanne. And but she had to clock off. It was the end of her shift, and it was a tricky time then to be in that position because of the changeover. And so, then I kind of endured an overnight labour experience that was really, really grim, and lots of things went wrong, and I was really sick, and blood pressure, and then sepsis and temperatures, and they broke my waters, and there was meconium in them, but nothing was escalated. And it got to the point where I was actually hallucinating. I was really, really freaked out and just not in a good place. And every time there were a couple of junior doctors who would come in to check on me overnight, and I was begging for a C-section. I said, I'm really unwell. We need to, please, can I have that? And it was sort of their mission to just convince me that things were okay and just to keep going. I had, sadly, the epidural took many different people, many different attempts to try and get it in. And there's kind of a window of what's acceptable. And I don't quote me on it, but I think it's about 90 minutes from requesting one to receiving one. Because obviously, if you're in that level of pain and you need pain management, it's undignified not to have it. And that was really horrendous. And even after the epidural, I was still in an awful lot of pain. And when I say kind of hallucinating, I mean anything that then Ryan or someone around me would say, I could hear it played back. It was kind of echoing around the room. So mentally and physically, I was in a horrendous state. I couldn't even imagine at this point kind of getting to or visualizing what I needed to get to in terms of being dilated. And then I suppose it was only then when there was a staff changeover again on the Monday morning, when the consultant came in and checked me, and and I'm really honest, so I don't know how much. I'll be really honest, and then
yes,
I don't want to just petrify people, but she would put her. She put her whole arm inside me and tried to sort of twist the baby out manually, and it was really unpleasant, and it wasn't working. So then she said, "Well, can we do the C-section?" And I honestly was just, yes, please, can we do the C-section? Because I've been begging for this for months, and thank goodness, actually, that we're going to put an end to all of this. Whatever the resolution is, we need to try something else because this is not working. And so we went into theatre, and it did feel frantic. And I know people that have had more of an emergency situation in this kind of stage, if you like, because perhaps the baby's heartbeat has stopped beating, or there's like a lot of fetal distress. But it was, everything moved very quickly. And then when we were in the theatre, my understanding was the C-section can be done in 20 minutes, but tends to be around half an hour, and is I don't want to say a simple procedure because it is major surgery, but it's something that's done all the time. And I have lots of friends who have done it and had an amazing experience with it.
Can I just ask, in the midst of that horror, so that cesarean where your uterine wall gets torn, like you start kind of bleeding out. There is nothing between you. There's not even a sheet in between. There is.
Yeah, so there is a sheet, and so I can see the blood just splashing all over the sheet.
Oh my God.
And Ryan is next to me, so he's actually witnessing this all as well. And I genuinely was lying on this table, paralysed, watching all of this blood splatter against this sheet, with blood all over the floor as well. I could feel shaky hands pressing down really high up against my ribs. And there was just this complete state of panic in the room. And there wasn't once one person who looked at me and said, or touched my hand and went, it's going to be okay. I didn't have that friendly face. And I have to say, since then, because I've had a number of surgeries since then, and I have met those people at the hospital, and I've had some amazing experiences with people who have an incredible bedside manner and who have made all the difference. But in that moment, I really, really could have done with somebody popping their head over the curtain and just filling us in with what was going on, because we had no idea. And then there was the kind of one of the hardest parts was the kind of false finish, if you like. Because I really thought that I couldn't stay alive for much longer. So I kept turning to Ryan it felt like 15 seconds. It probably wasn't that. And I kept just saying, am I alive? Am I alive? Because I couldn't understand how I was alive. And then I said, I don't think I can keep going for much longer. And I wouldn't have even had the kind of capacity to make the decision myself to say, hello, over there, please, can you put me to sleep now? And anyway, so Ryan then did ask how much longer we were going to be, how much longer was left. And they said, oh, we're about to start closing her back up now. And then they discovered that there was a lot of blood that they couldn't. So I had that sort of false hope in my head, thinking, okay, I can hold on for like another 20 minutes if this is it, and it's all going to be over. And then unfortunately it wasn't, and then there was a considerable amount of time longer that they were still operating on me for. And I suppose, even the fact that I haven't mentioned Leo throughout this whole account just goes to show how traumatic it was, because I didn't have space in me to care about the fact that I had a baby that had been pulled out of me. Forget all of the skin on skin and the I was going to call them luxuries, but it's not. It's the normalities that most women experience. I mean, everything that I'd seen or heard in the hypnobirthing and the other stuff, it couldn't have been further from my scenario. He came out. I did hear some crying, and then he was whisked away quite quickly. And so there was a point where Ryan was between us both, genuinely thinking that he was going to lose us both. And I shouldn't say this, but even he, but he couldn't leave me because we had a relationship already established. He had to be by my side. He didn't go off and then follow Leo into NICU. He was there. And I actually don't know what I would have done if he hadn't been there.
I'm so sorry for what you went through. I'm so sorry. You describe it with such truth that I can visualize it and see it. And I can only imagine what you went through, the terror that you experienced. And the fact that that was then only the start of a series of very severe health issues that led you into ICU some weeks later when you had another massive hemorrhage at home.
Yeah.
And this idea of death, of thinking that you're already dead or that you're bound to die, that resurfaced in ICU, didn't it? Can you explain that? Because again, I've never heard it expressed before.
So I suppose the moment where I felt the closest to death was following the hemorrhage. So when I was, and you can read a little bit more about it in the book. When I was witnessing myself without the medical help for an extended period of time, losing a lot of blood very quickly. So I think I lost 5.5 liters in a very short space of time. And for context, I think I probably only have about 4 liters because I'm a very small person.
Yeah.
So it's a lot. And witnessing that, with knowing that there was nothing I could do because it's not my arm, and that's not to make light of if someone's arm gets cut off, but I couldn't tourniquet myself. I couldn't put something inside me. You know, I can't put my arm inside my vagina. I wouldn't know what to do. And I went in, I clicked into a mode where, so at the beginning I was screaming because Ryan was on the phone to A&E, to the ambulance, and they said that they were going to be 10 minutes. And so then I called, and then they came incredibly quickly. So I'm very, very grateful for that. And then pure fear. And then I sort of started thinking, tracking back through my brain, trying to remember any nugget of information I'd ever learned about anything to do with bleeding and how I might be able to somehow remarkably slow it down. And I couldn't remember anything. So I started breathing. And I kind of cycled between like feeling utterly calm, utterly petrified, angry and shouting that we weren't moving quickly enough because I couldn't understand how time was moving so slowly, incredibly slowly. And, it's only retrospectively that I look back, I understand that they've got to fill out a form, call ahead to find space in a hospital. It was in the middle of the night to check which hospital might have a consultant that might be able to fix me. And there's protocol that they need to follow. But when you feel like that, you just don't understand how everyone around you isn't crying and screaming with panic, because that's how you feel. And then when I arrived at the hospital, I was in a side room, and that was the scariest moment for me, because then I was actually not with Ryan and not with anybody, because he wasn't allowed through the A&E doors. And again, I've had some experiences since then that have been completely different, like night and day. And that is because, well, not solely because of this, but having the comfort of having somebody there that you can look into the face of and just hold. It makes a big difference. So I was on my own. It was the middle of the night. There wasn't a lot of urgency, and I laid down. I was lying there, and I felt completely paralyzed. And I just thought, this is it. And I really thought, I cannot believe I've wasted so much of my life worrying about such ridiculous things. And it makes me sad, but it's just, namely work, money, doing up the stupid house that I spent so long building, because I was never going to live in it. And I was never going to live in it with my family. And that made me really sad. And then another thing that made me feel terrible was just imagining my family, which, I couldn't have my parents go through the heartache of it. That made me really sad, like imagining them crying all the time. So it was horrendous. And then I think I had just all this like weird burning sensation basically in my brain, which sometimes comes to haunt me when I have a flashback. And I got to a point where so then when they had made a plan for me, and they were going to move my body and take me up. And this it all would have happened quite quickly, but it felt like forever. I just remember being on the trolley, and I literally was actually begging for them to put me to sleep. Just begging, just shouting, put me to sleep, put me to sleep. Because I couldn't tolerate being alive anymore. The pain was so bad. I didn't care. I didn't think for a second about whether I'd wake up or not. I just needed to be out, just take it away. And then, thankfully they did, but not before I had to sign some, which is crazy because I was in just an outer worldly state at this point. I think I had to sign some form. And and then the next thing I know, I did wake up in intensive care, and I had tubes down my throat and I was numb everywhere. And my brain just hadn't really processed what had happened because I hadn't gone into the operation. And there are very different situations going into an operation with an understanding of what's actually about to happen and having time. Like, I've had a number of planned operations or slightly less emergency operations, and it's very different because you're compos mentis when you're put to sleep. So then when you wake up, you're a bit more compos mentis. So you know what to expect.
Yes.
I had no one had told me, like, I'd never seen ICU before. I didn't know that I might wake up there. I didn't know what the tubes down my throat were. So I assumed that actually my voice box had been removed and I couldn't feel my legs. So I assumed that they'd been amputated.
Oh my gosh, you poor thing.
It was really bad.
You poor thing. I'm so sorry for what you went through. And I'm so grateful to you for your courage in telling us this. It's so important what you do, Louise. And I never, ever want you to doubt it.
Thank you.
Can I ask you how it feels that the day of your son's birth is also the day that started your worst trauma? I know that you have such an amazing relationship with that beautiful baby boy now, but that must be so conflicting in so many ways.
I don't connect him to the birth at all, which is really brilliant. And I know that because for a lot of people, they are triggered by certain dates in the calendar. And I honestly think that Leo was sort of born into my world 6 months after. That was when we started getting to know one another. For the first 6 months, I had to just focus on living. I had incredibly bad PTSD, anxiety. I was living in perpetual fear, was petrified of most things in my house. Even just waking up, I was petrified. And working through that was really tiring, very scary. And I didn't have a lot of space for anybody else. And I don't even think that I'd asked Ryan a question for a really long time. Like I didn't know. I completely shut everything out. Me and Leo kind of started connecting after that. Even if my head was in la la land, if I would lie down on the floor next to him and get a book, and I was just about able to like read the words, but I couldn't concentrate on anything. But I just knew that I was putting in like a tiny, tiny bit of effort, even if that was sort of 5 minutes at the beginning and then building up from there. And I would say to Ryan, can you take pictures? So I would ask him to take pictures to create for the memories so that when I was better, that then there wasn't this huge gap in time. And we would do occasional things. And I would have these sort of savior moments where I would have a day where I would actually feel kind of okay. They really did keep me going.
We're now 3 years on, almost.
2.5, yeah.
2.5. And I'm aware that we need to get on to your third failure because it's connected with all of this. But where are you now with motherhood?
I now really enjoy being a mother. And it's very cliche for me to say this, but I really mean it. I know I am a better mother having been through the trauma, because my whole perspective has changed. And I know what I've had to fight to get to this place. So I really appreciate it. I'm not going to waste this moment because I know that anything could be around the corner.
Thank you. I just want to take a moment. Thank you so much for talking about that. Your third failure is your body failing you.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously a lot of that is wrapped up in what you went through with your deeply traumatic birth. But before that, in 2018, I think, you were diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, which is something that has plagued you for quite a long time. And you recently made the decision to go public with the fact that you've been fitted with a stoma, which again, I just think is so incredible and empowering. And stomas have never looked so hot. Thank you. Thank you. I just salute you.
Thank you.
But tell me why you wanted to pick this one as a failure. As someone who historically had been so into fitness, on the cover of Women's Health magazine twice, how much of a shift has it been for you in terms of your relationship with your body?
Well, I think the way I've framed it is really harsh on myself, saying that my body has failed me, because my body has also actually lived and has lived through an awful lot of physical health problems. So I think what I mean is that it is the drastic change, and from being someone that has always treated my body so, well, I say always, not when I was drinking and partying a lot, but I've spent so much time really looking after my body. And I really made some big changes when Ryan and I started dating, and he's introduced me to an incredible lifestyle. And I really love my body. And not in a vain way, but he really taught me how to kind of respect my body. And I really enjoyed it. And everything kind of was just getting better and better. And I'd not really faced any adversity, and I was getting stronger, and life was really good. And then it's kind of been on this roller coaster. But my body took a really long time to get back into a place where I recognized it. And in fact, it had actually taken 2 full years for me to actually look in the mirror and think, oh, I think I've got my old body back. And I haven't had to, not through, hounding it, but just it's taken 2 years just for things to level out and for me to go back to being me, like Louise Thompson, whatever my norm is, which is not the same as anybody else's, but that was the window. Maybe it took a really long time because I've really struggled with exercise over the last couple of years. I feel immensely triggered by it. I always tend to feel really, really exhausted the following day. And that's a really hard adjustment for me because I was someone that preached exercise as being the answer to most people's problems. So I've done a complete 180, and I've had to be really, really gentle and compassionate with myself and just do the bare minimum, basically. But just looking after Leo is a fair amount of energy expenditure anyway.
Do you think you've befriended your body finally?
Yes, and now I really do love my body, and I see it in a completely different light to what I used to. I used to pick on things like having, I'm a bit top heavy, my arms are much bigger than, I'm just could say that I was slightly out of proportion. And I used to I've had a good relationship with my body, but I there were things that used to bother me. Whereas now, and even people say that I'm very brave for sharing the fact I have a stoma. I just see my body as a vessel for carrying organs that keep me alive. I really do. This little grey bag is such a small price to pay for health. And I'm kind of at peace with it. And I just don't fixate on it in the same way. When I look in the mirror, I'm looking for health. I'm not looking for how I look. But one of the scariest times for me recently, which was post having the ileostomy bag, which was I had my whole colon removed. I think it was called a total colectomy to remove the ulcerative colitis, which was across the whole thing. And then they pulled my small intestine out of my stomach. About 3 weeks after the surgery, I lost an immense amount of weight in 1 week. So I think I lost 7 kilos. And I know so many people are just constantly, we waste so much time trying to lose weight. I don't know why, like, as women always wanting to lose weight or be skinnier, it's like celebrated being
Make
thin.
ourselves smaller.
It's horrendous.
Yeah.
And then, losing all of that weight really, really quickly, it was the most petrifying thing I've ever experienced, really, when it comes to weight, because it was completely out of my control and it wasn't intentional. And actually having meat on you is an indicator of health and being able to absorb your food properly. So it's something that I will never take for granted, is actually being able to put on weight.
Louise, I think you are one of the strongest people I've ever met.
No.
I am so grateful to you and for you. I think you have done something utterly extraordinary with everything you've been through. I think that in your pain, you have found your purpose. And I never want you to doubt that and to doubt the immense power of what you do. It is so crucially important. And we are so thankful for it. And I personally am so thankful that you have come on How to Fail. Thank you for being one of the most extraordinary guests I've ever met.
Thank you so much for having me and for just making this conversation so easy to have.
Please do follow How to Fail to get new episodes as they land on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please tell all your friends. This is an Elizabeth Day and Sony Music Entertainment original podcast. Thank you so much for listening.